Welcome to the Catch Some Soulshine podcast, and I'm your host, Renee Bova. I'm here to share drastic self-care measures that will help empower you to awaken brilliance after life's darkest moments. I've discovered countless measures that help heal and transform you so that you can live a joyful, empowered life without feeling trapped in the past, without clinging to the opinions of others, and without fear of vulnerability in a community setting. I'm so glad you're here. So grab a cup of coffee because it's time to catch some soulshine. All right, welcome back. I actually started listening to Dr. Constance Scharff, well over a year ago, and I loved everything she had to say. She has so much knowledge. You are in for a real treat with this podcast, and I think we're going to have a couple of them because she has so much knowledge, research, and you're going to be blown away. So I listened to her on a podcast called The Jar, and she really studies the brain chemistry and, how that helps us heal and different things about that. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. She's written a couple of books, which I would recommend that you get. And we're going to dive right in.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So tell everybody how you got started in this research.
So I have been sober for more than 25 years. And there's a saying in academic circles, research is very often me search, right? That I want to look into, especially in the social sciences, psychology, and so forth. I want to look into things that have affected me in my life. Even in medical fields, you'll find people who, do maybe cancer research or gastroenterology or something because they've been affected by that, if not personally in their circle, friends and family. So I'm sober, but I also suffered very extreme trauma when I was a child, a lot of sexual abuse from the ages of 7 to 10. And as a result of that, had pretty severe post-traumatic stress PTSD symptoms, including into early sobriety, actually into long-term sobriety, if I'm honest. And so I've been sober since the 90s. When our veterans started coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, I was involved in 12 steps at that point. I was very depressed, but I was sober for a number of years. I don't know, 8, 10, something. And I was in graduate school, and our veterans were not getting sober. And many of them were suicidal. And I knew one veteran, now I know several, but I knew one veteran who came back and killed himself. And I was so upset by this because I really related to the veterans around trauma. That while the details of our stories were very, very different, the substance of our experience with trauma was similar. Post-traumatic stress, complex post-traumatic stress, however you want to define that. I don't love pathologizing terms. I don't like that jargon, but in that realm. And when this young man who was 23, a Marine, married with an infant child, had done several tours overseas, medically discharged in very bad physical and emotional distress, physical pain and emotional distress, and he killed himself, I thought, there has to be better treatment because at that time there really wasn't great treatment for trauma. And that's what I dove into. I was like, I didn't get sober to be miserable. And these people aren't getting sober. And frankly, a lot of them weren't making it, period. And I thought there has to be something better. And that's why I got into mental health research, particularly around addiction and trauma. And my specialty is in complementary and indigenous resources for treating addiction and trauma.
Right up my alley. I'm a nurse practitioner and I specialize in addiction and mental health
Yes.
because of my life experiences. I
Yes.
started out in family practice and then, because of my life, I gravitated toward addiction and mental health services. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's so true. We do gravitate to the things that, you know, we feel we can be helpful with. Um,
Well, and one of the beautiful things about the kind of research that I do is see, I could try everything out on myself because I'm working with complementary therapies. I'm not working with any pharmaceuticals. And my real goal, the first 5 years or so of my research, was to look for interventions, therapeutics, whatever you want to call them, that have few or no side effects. So things that if you try them, maybe they work, maybe they don't, but they're not going to harm you.
yeah.
And so it was wonderful for me to go out and try something, and maybe it helped me or maybe it didn't. That was irrelevant, as opposed to I wasn't going to get harmed by any of them. And I found that a lot of them did give me some relief. And what we found most in the research is that any one of these interventions on their own is not fantastic. It might give you a little relief in the short term, but none of them are fantastic. But we don't understand why. But when you put a group of these complementary therapies together, they are greater than the sum of their parts. And we start seeing very, very good results when we use a whole bunch of things that on their own don't really make much of a difference.
I am just blown away because I had a meeting with the owner of our company,
Hmm.
and we were talking about addiction treatment and whatnot. And I said to him, I am going to put together something. They may consider it complementary
Hmm.
modalities, but I said, it's like you took the words out of my mouth. I don't have the research behind it, but I said, I know that there are things that I have done, a lot of different things
Hmm.
that can help people
So I wrote a
without
book
all
about
this
that. I
medicine.
wrote a book about that in 2012. It's called Ending Addiction for Good. It's actually, people are like, ending addiction for good. I'm like, well, first of all, we have really good therapeutics for addiction treatment. We don't use them by and large in the United States. And we, when someone doesn't respond appropriately, we blame them. Right?
Yeah,
They're non-compliant. They don't take direction. They're not willing. They haven't hit a bottom. And I'm like, no, we just didn't give them proper therapy. There is a recovery program that is very good and tried and true. So in this book, Ending Addiction for Good, which is a nod to Prochaska and his book Changing for Good, but in Ending Addiction for Good, Richard Tate, who at that time owned the Cliffside Malibu addiction treatment facility, that's since been sold, and he started a new facility. I believe it's called Carrera, out of Los Angeles. And in that book, that is the basis of my research, the start of my research. I was the director of addiction research and the senior addiction research fellow for Cliffside at that time. And we talk about in the book a whole bunch of different therapeutics, everything from bariatric oxygen chambers to uh, meditation.
mhm.
And there are reasons why we learned subsequent to the publishing of the book. We talk about it a little bit in the book, um, why they work together. And it's because of the way they add on to each other in the brain neurologically and neurochemically. But yeah, I mean, that book is available uh, on
Yeah.
Amazon. It's out of print now because the treatment facility was sold, um, and so it's no longer in print. But you can get a used copy of that, or on my website. I do talk about different modalities that people can use and how they work and why they work together. So that information is available.
I love this. I
Yeah,
am
that
so I just can't tell you how excited I am to be talking to you. I need to talk to you after this podcast.
sure, that's fine. So if this is something that you're interested in, let me go through a few of the different modalities.
Yes.
Right. So, first and foremost, one of my favorites is music. So, what we know from music is that playing music and singing, not listening to music is also very positive neurologically, but it has different outcomes. So, if you have, for example, people with Alzheimer's and dementia and so forth, if they listen to music from their youth, you will see immediately, and then often for several hours after, they'll have more cognitive function. They'll start to recognize people, they'll know who they are, where they're at, and so forth. But playing music and singing has has something different. Now, I need to mention this because this is very important. Your brain does not know if you are good at it, has no idea. It only knows if you're doing it. So, this judgment of, well, I'm not a very good singer. Well, somebody told you that, right?
Hmm.
Because there was a time when you were 2 or 3 years old and you heard the music in the grocery store and you're grooving, right? You're getting down.
Right.
So it isn't just about quality. It is just about trying it out. So when you play music and sing, your entire brain lights up
Hmm.
and your brain dumps serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine, three feel good chemicals. Now, you and I have been sober for a while, so I'm going to assume that our brains both work in a normative way, right? That
Hmm.
we're not very, very high or very, very low or suffering from some sort of, biochemical, mental health problem. If you and I have a bad day and we get stuck in traffic, we're coming home and we hear a song that we like on the radio, right, and do our own carpool karaoke and sing like we don't care who's listening because nobody is, right? You will feel better. And I know this because when I was newly sober, I used to drive from my house in West LA and go up the coast I'd go out to Pacific Palisades and up the coast to Malibu and back because I was so crazy and listen to music and sing along with it. And it calmed me down. Well, that's
Same.
because, yeah, it's because your brain is dumping these feel good chemicals. Now, you and I now with reasonably normal brain function, we are gonna just feel a little better, right? It's gonna elevate our mood. It's life's not so bad. But if you are newly sober, right, and you've just detoxed or in the process of detoxing, your brain doesn't produce those chemicals because you're getting them from the outside, right? So your
Right.
brain's not used to doing that. Then so you're starting out low, then you play music or sing, and boom, you get high. So what we found is in when we use this in treatment, people stay in treatment longer, are more engaged in the treatment process. We uncover, if we're writing songs, for example, we'll uncover issues that we can then take to the treatment team to use in other ways. And people want to participate because if you can give someone who's been getting high a natural high, right, they want to come back for more. But it opens up the possibility of other therapeutics working. So if you do that kind of a therapy, say once or twice a week, right, and then you pair that with other complementary therapies, you really can have a very profound impact on treatment outcomes. So I love music. And I actually, if you want to know more about it, I wrote a book, Rock to Recovery: Music as a Catalyst for Human Transformation, that gives 18 case studies, including my own, but rock stars and everybody, veterans and people with mental health problems and sexual assault survivors and the whole nine yards, but it gives a little bit of the science behind it, especially the neurology, because I think people don't understand the neurology of trauma.
Right.
Because I've worked with thousands of people over the last 20 or so years. And I know one person who genuinely says to me, I don't know how I developed addiction. There's no family history of addiction. I had a wonderful childhood, plenty of money, nobody hit me, all the things. I think he actually played baseball like through high school and maybe even into college. Like just he's like, I don't know. I know one. Right. And there's always, some sort of idiopathic, like, oh, I don't know how that happened, but it did. Everybody else has some level of trauma, poverty, marginalization, lack of access to care when care was really needed. One of the things it talks about in 12-step programs is that we want to, quote unquote, raise the bottom so that potential alcoholics, which I don't love that terminology, but that's what's in the book,
Yeah.
um, can recover before they experience all the horrors, right?
Right.
That they can, that true hitting bottom. And I think that's so important because that's when people need care, right? You need care right after the trauma has happened. So then you don't have to go into all these other things because addiction, in my experience, is usually someone's effort to cope with
Right.
something that they don't have the resources or the support to address.
Mhm.
And with trauma, we now understand that trauma is really emotional experience that's been trapped in the body.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
not really a psychological problem, but that's how we treat it. And so
Right.
that's why a lot of people don't get better.
Yeah, when Brad was extremely intelligent, very intelligent, but he suffered from a very excessive attention deficit disorder,
Mhm,
and he really struggled in school.
mhm,
Uh, Not with people liking him because, the kids liked him, he was the class clown. But he was disruptive, couldn't sit still, um, had trouble with dexterity,
mhm,
uh, dyslexia,
mhm.
and that really, really impacted him, you know?
Sure. Well, let's look at some of these things. First of all, I don't know where we got this idea that children are supposed to sit still behind a desk for hours at a time
Right.
for, 6, 8, 10 hour, whatever they are a day, right? Like if you look at the history of education,
Mhm.
that is a very, very new phenomenon.
Yeah.
That is a very new phenomenon. And so, like, I mean, of course kids wiggle. During the
Mhm.
pandemic, I don't have children, but a friend of mine has some young children, and I would go over to her house during the summer. And I used to teach right out of college. I did a lot of outdoor school. I worked at summer camps. I love outdoor and experiential education programs. But I'd take her kids out. Well, they loved working with me because what did we do? We wrote poetry and we painted and
Mhm.
we went on nature walks, right? Because
Mhm.
they're little kids, they get exposed to everything. Like, I don't
Yeah.
want your icks, right? So we'd go and we'd walk around and you know pick blackberries and then make blackberry jam or something. So that's how kids learned. And high school, right? Those were apprenticeships. You got apprenticed out or you worked on your family's farm or whatever. And
Yeah.
so it's unnatural. So, of course, some percentage of children are going to have problems, and the whole system penalizes them for not being able to do it right.
Right.
Right? They're bad kids.
Right.
In the same way, we see with the transgender community.
Mhm.
Transgender individuals have addiction and suicide rates that are astronomical compared to the uh, general population.
Yes.
Well, they're not more addictive in personality. They're not more suicidal in like some sort of basic function, like what makes my hair dark, right? That they're not genetically predisposed. No, it's because everything in society puts this pressure on them that you aren't okay. You're
Mhm.
not right. You're not good enough.
Right.
It's the same thing that we see in populations of students that are just crushed under pressure to achieve.
Mhm.
You're not good enough if you don't get into that school. There's something wrong with you if you can't sit still. Why do you want to wear those clothes? There's something wrong with you. There's a book that came out a few years ago that I don't think got enough attention, probably because it was co-authored by Oprah. But it was called What Happened to You?
Hmm.
That we ask the wrong question, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But what happened to you? What happened that this is now your behavior? And one of the things I liked in that book was Oprah talked about the school that she had in South Africa and how they brought all these girls from very disadvantaged situations in South Africa. And then surprise, surprise, there were a lot of behavioral issues.
Right.
Right. And so the whole organization had to really look at, okay, how do we deal with this? Because
Mhm.
there's clearly not something wrong with all the girls that they brought in for the school that got scholarships. There's clearly not something wrong with all of them, just in the same way that, there's not something wrong necessarily. That's why I don't like pathologizing terms and labels. I mean, we have to use them to some extent, but kids with ADHD, they're just more active than
Mhm.
normal by center line, not normal and abnormal. I don't like that distinction. But
Yeah.
a sort of centrist, right? Average,
Yeah.
right? So they're more. I just went to a meeting of the Explorers Club, the very interesting group. I'm up for membership. And it was two guys talking about different things, but mountaineering. I don't do that kind of exploration. If it involves an ice axe, thank you, no. One of the guys said, "Well, you really shouldn't just go out into the Swiss Alps and on a whim." And I was like, afterwards, I was like, I never am going to
Right.
on a whim go mountaineering in the Swiss Alps. Like that's things that are never going to happen. That's going to be one of them. I'm just never going to
Mhm.
accidentally find myself mountaineering in the Swiss Alps. I might accidentally find myself in a Swiss bakery, right? But not mountaineering on the Alps. And so these people, they have a different center point, a different compass point that about what gets them excited. They are more active than I
Right.
am. It does not sound fun for me when you see them on these shows like climbing Everest, right? And they put a ladder and you're supposed to go across the ladder across a crevasse that you're going
Mhm.
to fall to your death in the ice and the snow. That doesn't sound fun to me.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with either of us. That's what people don't get. See, here's the problem
Mhm.
with addiction. Unfortunately, when someone has active addiction, it's not like other diseases or disorders. And I like dis-ease, like ill
Right.
at ease, as opposed to
Right.
disease, one word.
Right.
It's not like other disorders because, see, when you have cancer, in the course of your cancer treatment, you don't hurt other people.
Exactly.
But with addiction, unfortunately, other people have, number one, expectations of my behavior that are inappropriate. And number two, they get in the way of my problem. So let's say, Dawn, you were having me to your wedding and you invited me to your wedding and I was using, and you said, listen, I really love you. I want you to be there, but you can't be there if you're using. Are you new? I have to use.
Right.
I have to, just to be okay. Now, I get it that you don't want me to embarrass you or embarrass myself or cause a scene or whatever. But the reality is, that's kind of what happens. I am going to show up or not, on time or not, cause a scene or not, because I love you enough that I want to be there. And I'm, try to control your drinking, like, it's a hit or miss issue. Like, I could try to just drink enough to not be sick, but that doesn't usually happen. That doesn't usually go that way. So I have a cousin who had a daughter who's since passed, but had a daughter with severe um, addiction issue, really heroin. Um, and she passed long before fentanyl was an issue. But she wanted her daughter to be at her wedding. And she knew the daughter's going to have to be at least a little high. And the daughter wanted to be there so much. Well, she was sitting in the front row next to her uncle during the wedding. And she went on the nod, right? Started to fall asleep. And she fell forward just a little bit in her chair, which would have been no big deal, except one of her breasts fell out of her dress,
Oh gosh.
right? So everybody's sort of like, well, Uncle, who was cool as could be, he pushed her back, pushed her shoulder back, popped her boob back in her dress, and everybody went on with the wedding. Perfect. Perfect. Right?
Hmm.
But I'll tell you what, she died just a few years later. Mom was very happy that now she has that memory, that daughter got to be there.
Yeah.
That daughter got to be there. And
Hmm.
that's, if we can have that kind of compassion and understanding of what addiction actually is. See, I don't mean to hurt you, but if you put limitations on what I can do, then, you know,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that you don't protect yourself. Please hear that.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that you don't.
Exactly.
So if I have to steal to get what I'm doing, I saw a video on, I don't know, TikTok or someplace the other day, and they were talking about, that you can do it attitude. They're like, someone who needs crack does not wake up in the morning and say, I'm too broke to do crack today. They figure it out, right? So if my figuring it out is stealing from you, you don't have to invite me to your house,
Right.
but you'll have a better relationship and more opportunity to help and be of service if you can understand and accept
Hmm.
that my using doesn't have anything to do with you. Even if I tell you it does, it doesn't. Has
Right.
nothing to do with you.
Right. It's called loving people where they're at with healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody's boundaries are different. I remember people telling me, you got to kick him out. You got to get him out. And I just couldn't until, one day it just got so painful and so bad. I told him, you have to go. And he did. Ended up coming home because he wanted to be sober, but couldn't. He wanted recovery. Um, and then, ultimately, the last time that he left, it was like, well, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. I'll find a homeless shelter for you. I will find, a sober living. I'll find treatment wherever. I will help you, but I can't have you here. And he chose recovery.
Sure.
That was
And
his
so
choice.
so there you can do something we call love someone to death.
Mhm.
Because if you just love without the boundaries and just say, I'm going to pay for your cell phone. You can stay at my house. It doesn't matter if you steal from me. I'm not going to throw you out no matter what, right? Then we don't let people feel the consequences of their actions,
Mhm.
because it's the consequences of our actions that have the potential, and I underscore potential because it doesn't always work, have the
Right.
potential to move someone towards recovery. Right.
Right.
So if we just love, because I've been a big advocate, right, for the last few minutes for love them and understand where they're at. But you do have to do that in a boundaried way, that they don't get to hurt you,
Right.
that
And I
they
think
don't
that
get to do that.
the tricky thing with the boundary is that so many people have been hurt so bad by the addiction that the boundary is an ugly boundary. it's like a severing or pushing somebody away. It's not, with love. Like, I
Well,
love you,
people
but
wait
you
too
can't
long.
be here. Yeah.
People wait too long and they've been hurt too much,
Yeah.
right? Instead of, I had a friend who died of sudden cardiac arrest after relapsing. I think it's very, she wasn't sober living, but she was sober because that's the first thing they check. I think it was probably from long COVID. I think she was having some trouble with long COVID. But her parents did something, pretty smart with her. They let her live with them while she was sober. And at the end, after she'd been sober for some time and then had relapsed, they're like, you can't move back home. You can't. And if it means that you're homeless, okay. And they didn't take her. She had a little dog. Someone else took her. She was down in San Francisco. Someone else took her dog in. Right? We have to have those boundaries.
Right.
But that left the door open for, if you need help, we can help you do that.
Yeah.
When she said to me, I want to go to treatment, I worked at a number of treatment centers and have relationships with treatment centers all over the country. I was like, yep, I know exactly what you need, because she had a lot of physical problems. So I needed a very specialized place. We
Right.
needed some place that would let her take her little dog with her because we had nowhere to put the dog, all sorts of different things. And I was like, ring, ring, ring. How
Mm-hmm.
quick can we get her in there? And so that the boundaries allow us to be in connection.
Right.
I'll say one more thing before, we end this session, and that is that what's important in recovery is connection.
Yes.
And that one of the things that we're seeing is, we think that one of the reasons we're seeing rising addiction rates is this disconnection we have socioculturally, right, in our society, in our culture, that there is this massive disconnection. And it's not just, cell phones, right? It isn't just that. And what I've seen in the research that I do globally is that almost every group, they don't wait till someone gets really, off the tracks. When they start seeing a little anxiety, a little depression, a little disconnection, a little antisocial behavior, a little bit of that, in communities around the world, people group together and they start saying, well, we don't know what's wrong, but here's all the things that are right about you. And they tell the person how right they are until they believe it. Because if your entire community is telling you how special you are, and you're the only one out who's saying, no, there's something wrong with me, that is not a story that's going to last, because it's not supported by the people around you. See, if the people around you are saying, well, you're weird, or you're this, or you're awful, or, whatever it is, subhuman, baby killer, I don't know, whatever your ethnic group, your religious group, your gender group is supposedly responsible for in this larger social narrative. Well, how can you get better in that?
Mm-hmm.
How can you get better in that? So it's really about this connection, but connections have boundaries.
Yeah.
Otherwise, then the whole group comes down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is hard, because I have a lot of education about this and I've worked on myself, but I can still get caught up in that old thinking. I can very easily, because my youngest son and I are like this. And
So let's talk about new thinking in part 2.
okay, let's do it. Before we end this segment, I just want to say, please check out the show notes, because I'm going to have links to Constance books, your website, so that you can get some more information on this. She has a wealth of information. Please go to her and check that out.
Thanks for joining me on the Catch Some Soulshine podcast. I also want to encourage you to please rate, like, and share this podcast. Leave a comment that helps the algorithm. And if you are interested, I do have a free 11 powerful affirmation journal that features some of my artwork, and that will be in the comments as well, soulshine-sparkle.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week.